The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Weber, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cass, you mentioned a study by the EPA that found that Pittsburgh extreme heat mortality will rise exponentially beyond levels even in Phoenix or Houston. So I've got a couple of questions for you. Is it true that the closer to the equator you get, the warmer it is?
Generally speaking, I believe that's right.
You believe that's right from your geography back in the 6th grade?
And traveling south from time to time.
Well, you need to come to Galveston and spend lots of money. I owned an air conditioning company for over 35 years. So when you start, and by the way, we loved seasons changing. We loved heat in Texas. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, a couple things from being in business 35 years. We're not experiencing mass casualties. Now, Congressman Dunn from Arizona said that he loved the heat too. Over in Arizona, they've got a drier heat. Of course, we have a more humid heat. So I want you, Mr. Cass, to expand on what's wrong with two things, if you can. I realize one's more scientific and one's a little less. What's wrong with the prediction of study mortality in Pittsburgh, which is arguably further up north and a lot further away from the equator than we are there in Texas, that they think there would be 75 more times of mortalities in Phoenix in Pittsburgh than in Phoenix or in Houston. Number one, what's wrong with that study? And number two, isn't that a bit hyperbole to create some kind of need to really push forward on more regulations?
Thank you. The technical way of describing the problem, I think, is to say that the study assumes all things are held constant. And of course, that's traditionally how we expect economic analysis.
But let me interject here real quick. So if that was true, we're closer to the equator. If it was getting hotter in Pittsburgh, would it be getting hotter in Texas? Would that be a safe assumption?
Yes.
At the same rate?
There are variations, but generally speaking.
Okay, keep going.
So I think the way to understand the problem is that they identified an effect of extreme heat days in Pittsburgh on mortality and assumed that a day of that heat level will always have the same effect, even if Pittsburgh's climate changes. That's a very poor assumption to make because we can see what places with warmer climates look like and how they respond to temperatures, and we know that they respond differently from Pittsburgh. And so if you're going to try to project how Pittsburgh would respond to a warmer climate, you need to look at how people in warmer climates respond. You can't assume that Pittsburgh is going to respond as if it still has.
You buy adequate air conditioning. I can tell you from experience how that happens in the Gulf Coast.
That's exactly right. And I think it's important to point out when we talk about adaptation that technological adaptation and certainly that's the title of the hearing is only one form of adaptation. There are biophysical adaptations. People do get used to the heat. There are behavioral adaptations. There are economic adaptations. There are social adaptations.
There's probably a certain number of people in Pittsburgh who don't buy air conditioning because of the cost, because they figure they can tough it out in the warmer times because it has a cooler climate more often, more so than Texas does. And then even though 71 degrees to us is very, very cool, Texas can be 95, 100, 105. And when they get caught with higher temperature, that in my opinion, that should be 90, 95, or 100, depending on how much ventilation's in that home. Then people could suffer heat strokes and be in real dire danger. Do you think that's part of the hype? The study is part of the hype, trying to force more regulations on the energy industry?
Well, so just to clarify, the 71 degrees is the low. So a day with a low of 71 is a warm day. But I think you're exactly right that people in Pittsburgh are not going to respond to one very warm day a year the way they would respond if they had 30. Absolutely. And so you would expect to see them behave differently in the context of a changing climate. I do think that part of the impetus for not including good analyses of adaptation in top-line cost estimates is to create large top-line cost estimates. And the fact that a lot of these analyses actually do provide analyses with adaptation, but put those off to the side as an alternative case instead of as the main case, I think is one of the problems.
Well, I will tell you that...
If I could offer a comment on
No, I'm sorry, Mr. Duffy, I'm running out of time. I can tell you from experience, 35 years in the air conditioning business, that the higher the efficiency ratings went up and the price was driven up, the less likely customers were to buy it. They were hard pressed to say, go spend $6,000 or $7,000 for a new air conditioning system. All of a sudden, you've created one now where you've got to be more efficient, better compressors, and more coil space. And now those are $8,000 or $9,000. They're having trouble coming up with a 6, much less the 8 or 9. So what do? They fix the old clunker that's terribly energy inefficient and keep it going for yet another year. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you.